Hi ho, and off to work we go for Reading FC this weekend as Coventry come to town to restart the Royals Championship campaign after the World Cup break. Lodged firmly in mid-table after what has, let's be honest, been a surprisingly solid start to the season. The question is whether it will be Reading fans singing E-I-E-I-O come May. Welcome to the Tilehurst End Podcast, episode 317. It is a delight to be back with you after the World Cup break. We've had a couple of little episodes to go out, which we'll update you on in a little bit. But joining me this week, we'll have a bit of a Reading chat and also a championship chat to work out exactly where we are. Firstly is the Tilehurst End's Ross Webber joining us again this week. How's it going, mate?
Doing really well, thank you. How you doing, Mark?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. We'll have a bit of a World Cup chat as well, which we've just been doing off air. So enjoyable.
Yep,
plenty to talk about this week for sure, even with, Reading haven't played for a few weeks. And also joining us for his Tilehurst End Podcast debut to inform us on what exactly goes on in the Championship outside of Berkshire, which, to be honest, I don't frankly care about usually. It's probably worth checking in this week is Gabriel Sutton. How's it going, mate?
I'm very well, thanks, Mark. It's not actually my Tilehurst End debut. I think I have been on the podcast before, but always a pleasure to come on. Look forward to chatting about Reading and the Championship.
Oh, well, it's certainly good you've got a better memory than me in that case, which is always good. That's a basic starting point for being on this podcast.
I'd imagine if you're a Reading fan, you don't need to have a memory of the last 5 years. So
exactly, yeah. We just try and forget most of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's why this podcast will be more of a refresh.
Sam's just gone, hasn't he?
Yeah, exactly. Who?
God, I don't need memories of that. We'll do a bit of a recap of kind of what's been going on for the season, just to kind of refresh ourselves where we are. We'll also be talking, what's coming up for Reading, obviously the Championship as a whole, as we've got Gab with us, and later on we'll be doing the big match preview with Coventry, which I'll get in early as a 2 p.m. kickoff for anyone who's not noticed that. I know that not everyone's glued to their phones like we are, so just to let you know that the kickoff has been moved for Saturday. So we'll get into that in a second. Before that, as always, a big thank you to our sponsors, ZCZ Films, and our Patreon subscribers, and a polite nudge into what we've been doing. A couple of episodes have gone up over the mid-season break. I chatted with Jordan Holsgrove, who is a Reading Academy midfielder who went off to Celta Vigo in Spain, now is playing in Portugal, and also Ollie and Ben spoke to Tom McIntyre for a Movember mental health special podcast, which I would highly recommend you check out if you have not yet. Right then, let's go into the recap and talk about what's coming up next for Reading after this World Cup break.
Come rain or shine, it's time to relive the latest match action with the recap.
This podcast is sponsored by ZCZ Films, Reading's oldest ultras.
Right, guys. Well, it feels a little bit weird that football domestically is back for Reading, at least, but because the World Cup hasn't actually finished yet. So let's just have a little bit of World Cup chat. I know everyone's fully engrossed in it, unless you happen to be a Uruguayan. So, Ross, then, how have you been enjoying it? I know you're an Englishman out in the States, which must have been quite interesting for one of the group stages, at least. How are you finding it?
It's been really fun. I've been getting more involved. So I live up here in Portland, Maine, on the Atlantic Ocean, and I've been having a really great time sort of interacting with the wider Portland, Maine soccer, as they'll call it, community in the last year or so. And that's really led to some fun connections. And I've met a lot of American, I'm going to call it football fans out here, which has been great. Where I watched the first game, Ecuador versus Qatar, was actually it's sort of like as British of a beer garden as you could create in an American city. The only problem was it was well below freezing, and it was I think it was 11 a.m. in the morning that game started. So a couple of cold ones in the cold to start the World Cup. It was certainly a fun experience. But no, it's been really good. Obviously, the USA-England game out here was very tense for my family. My wife's family are all avid football fans too. So I was very stressed out for that one. And probably the happiest Englishman going with a 0-0 draw.
Is your wife USA, Ross, or is
she? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So a bit of intermarriage rivalry.
Exactly.
Then.
Yeah. She wouldn't tell me who she was supporting until the USA were knocked out, and then she's like, "Yeah, I'm an England fan through and through." So.
Oh, right. Okay.
I think there've been a lot of Welsh fans doing that as well, actually.
Yeah. Yes, that's true.
Well, I suppose 0-0 was the perfect result in that sense for England versus USA. For a Reading point of view, we've had Junior Hoylett, who's actually, I think, had a really good World Cup with Canada. Started a couple of games, and what was making me laugh was on Twitter, everyone who obviously isn't a Reading fan saying, "Oh, Junior Hoylett, I remember him." And it's like, yeah, he's still decent. That's still a thing. Mamadou Loum didn't get on the pitch for Senegal, and Baba Rahman played a couple of times for Ghana, getting an assist against Portugal, although let's face it, he did make a bit of an error against Portugal as well. So, yeah, as you'd kind of expect for Reading players, a little bit of a surprise and a couple of errors thrown in for good measure. Gab, what Football League and Championship players have caught your eye, as well as any Reading players over the World Cup so far?
Well, unfortunately, I can't contribute at all to World Cup conversation because I've just felt incredibly disconnected from this World Cup. I think from my point of view, it's very difficult to separate this World Cup from a lot of the atrocities that are existing in Qatar. I have been able to park it a little bit to watch the England games. I was planning not to, actually, but then it was kind of a last-minute decision where it kind of felt like, come on, it's England, it's a World Cup, and I find it difficult to go away from that. But in terms of if England lose to France, I might as well not know who wins the World Cup. I've got no interest in it. I'm only interested if as far as England are in it. I don't really feel connected to the World Cup. But I hope it's coming home. So that's pretty much where I am on it.
No, that's fair enough. You're obviously totally welcome to that viewpoint. Certainly won't find any difficulty with that viewpoint here. And yeah, I think that's certainly something that a lot of people have felt. And yeah, I think to be fair, also Gab, there's been lots of Football League going on over the last few weeks, which has given you plenty to be watching as well. This is the other
thing as well. Actually, I think that's a really good point. Like normally, I don't know what either of you two think, but sometimes it's actually what makes a World Cup is the fact that you have like about a month where there's no football, or at least a couple of weeks, say, and that's kind of what gets you giddy because it's like you get kind of excited about it. For me, and especially being someone that works kind of covering the Football League and that kind of thing, it's like the World Cup's going on while the EFL's going on. So it's quite difficult to get myself into a mindset where I'm thinking, oh, I'm really excited about what's going to go on in this game because I'm sort of focused on other stuff. So I think that's kind of played into it as well. Whereas I think if you're probably a Premier League fan, you might have a slightly different mindset to the World Cup because it's the only top level football that's going on.
It's been really weird having it at this time. I think one of the narratives that I found interesting about it being at Christmas or this sort of holiday period for us, because there were games on Thanksgiving for us as well. It's been really interesting to see the players at a different part of their cycle in terms of the season. So obviously, like there's been complaints before that by the time a World Cup comes around, English players are just completely physically exhausted. They don't have anything left in the tank right now, though. In theory, these players who are playing in the Premier League and the other big leagues around Europe should be right in form at the moment. So it's been very interesting to see how that change in time has affected the form of some of the teams.
It will, and it'll be interesting to swing things back into a Reading point of view, exactly how the players who have been away are now going to play in this, because, Hoylett and Rahman have been playing top-level football, have been obviously training at a really high level over the last week. That are guys, they've been in Tenerife. Not saying that there's kind of low-level work going on there, but it's been perhaps a different atmosphere, more of a steady build-up to this return to action, although it's only been a few weeks off. So I think it'll be interesting to see for sure the players that have been at the World Cup, how they get on. Of course, whether they're even in the team. Our guys haven't really played too much, but there are a couple of Championship players who played every minute and such going into it. So one to watch for the weekend game, but hopefully just benefits us really if Hoylett and Rahman are even sharper than who they're playing against. Let's talk about the first half of Reading's season then that we've seen, although we're kind of at about a 2/5 stage in the season, aren't we, really? We're not actually even halfway through yet, 21 games.
45%, I think, as Bobbins put it in his latest column.
Yeah, which is given that you also have all the cup games and potentially playoffs and stuff coming up, we certainly aren't quite there yet, but makes an interesting situation. Reading at the moment, 2 points off the playoffs, 6 points off the relegation zone. Only 4 teams have lost more games. Only 3 teams have won more games. And on paper, at least, Reading, one of the worst defences. So, Ross, what's good? We've had a bit of chance to reflect on it now. We always like to stay on the Tilehurst End that we reflect on these things and come back with a calm, reasoned viewpoint. Where on the scale of utter disaster to absolute pandemonium miracle is the first half of the season going to rank for you as a Reading fan?
I think right now, the MVP in my mind as I think about the first half of the season has been Ryan Longman's knee. I think if that goal from Carroll's header doesn't go in off Ryan Longman against Hull right at the end of that game, then that break might have felt a bit different, because obviously we were starting to slide a bit in terms of results, not necessarily in terms of performance. I was lucky enough to be at the Luton game when I visited recently, and I thought that Reading played really well that day against a decent team. But they just weren't getting the results anymore. And so I think that getting that win before the break was really important. The order in which the good results have come this season has kind of skewed some perspectives, I think. I know that at the start of the season, most of us were just looking to survive. And that's very much still the case for myself, as boring as that is. But I think that boost to start the season perhaps had some people looking a little bit higher up in a way that maybe isn't quite sustainable. My goal for this season is that if we're effectively done by March, I will be thrilled. That's great. And I think that the first half of the season put us on a track to be able to do that. And it's whether that slide continues or whether with a little bit of a break, with that trip in Tenerife where everyone seems to be having a lovely time and getting that group atmosphere going again. I think that it could still be a good second half. So I think good first half in terms of, certainly in terms of performances. Some results could have been better, but I think that hot start has given us a nice cushion to sit on for a bit.
Just to add to that point that Ross was making as well, I think getting to 50 points, I think, should still be very much the target for Reading for a couple of reasons. The first one would be that I think that it would be very difficult to nail down a bottom 3 that are very likely to go down, whereas last season you had Peterborough, who probably weren't quite good enough for the level, Barnsley, who had massive issues in terms of massive drop-off, and then you had Derby, who had the points deduction, and it was pretty obvious that those 3 would likely be the bottom 3. I don't see that this time around. I think there's probably a little bit more uncertainty over whether something, and actually Reading, Birmingham, my team, Rotherham as well, they would have been the 3 that most people would have gone with before the season. They're actually, all 3 of them are in mid-table, and I think that creates a little bit of uncertainty over the relegation battle. The other point that I would also raise is that the financial issues become a little bit easier, or in terms of the restrictions, they're lifted a little bit next season. So if Reading can stay up this year, then obviously that takes a little bit of pressure off, and it gives you maybe a window to build something. So I think for both those reasons I've mentioned there, I think it's still very much about ticking off 50 points.
Yeah, Gab, what would you say is the kind of neutrals view on Reading this season? Because obviously I think everyone was thinking, even Reading fans aside, that this team was going to be going down. Has the first half of the season changed that perspective, or is there still kind of a sense, maybe even an expectation, that we'll collapse and what people expected to happen will still happen?
Well, I think there's a few things to unpack here. I think that the first one would be that naturally there is a little bit of scepticism about the Paul Ince appointment because he had spent so many years out of the game. Was it 8 years? And I think when you appoint a manager in those circumstances, there's obviously some questions. I think he did a sort of 6 out of 10 job last season, maybe 7 out of 10 job this year. And listen, all credit to him for that because he's found a way to get some results. I also think that possibly, and maybe I'm a little bit guilty of this as well, maybe not quite understanding the significance of some of the structural changes that we've seen, where I think it's De Jong has taken a bit of a step back more recently. They've appointed Marc Mayo as a technical director, that's the term. So he's sort of overseeing some of the footballing operations. So there's been 1 or 2 changes off the field, which probably makes things a little bit easier, and is probably why you may be outperforming expectation from the outside.
So what's next for Reading then? Because, in terms of a key area to improve, it feels a bit of a weird one because Reading have one of the worst defensive records in the league, and yet I don't feel like that's necessarily our worst point because we've tended to concede goals in kind of spurts where, we've had a couple of 4-0 defeats. Generally speaking, when we have won games, we've actually looked pretty decent defensively. Some of the losses, Burnley, for example, you wouldn't really put down to defensive errors as such. So where do we kind of think that Reading needs to improve? It's a difficult one for us Reading fans, isn't it, Ross? Because we know the personnel that we have in attack is so strong, certainly at this level, and kind of coordinating that into a proper plan and everything, and I would say is where I think that Reading can actually still do a lot better.
I would agree. I think the main takeaway I had for things that Reading need to improve on in the second half of the season is that they need to score the third goal more often. They've only scored 3, I think, twice this season so far. So you're only scoring 2. You're just constantly leaving yourself open to just dropping points and letting things go. That really bad defense. It certainly hasn't been perfect, but I think Reading have a bit of a habit of collapsing when they do concede. So the way the team is set up, to me, it looks as though it's been set up to play either from a draw or with a lead. And when we have to start playing behind, that's when things can get quite ragged quite quickly. So that leads to, pushing the wingbacks further forward, which might leave space in behind. I love our academy Toms very, very much. Tom McIntyre, Tom Holmes, both great players, bring different things to the table. None of those are speed. And so when they are left to defend against guys who are running straight at them, if we're chasing a lead, sometimes that can be a little bit ropey. So I think that really we're doing a good job of putting together a team that can compete on the front foot from either a drawing or a winning position. I'd like to see them push their attack forward a little bit more to ensure that they take those points.
Could I just ask you, Ross, just to kind of follow up on the point about Holmes and McIntyre, because I would also think that you're without some big centre-backs. Obviously, Scott Dann hasn't played this season. A lot of centre-backs have been injured, actually. Liam Moore's been absent, hasn't he? Naby Sarr's quite a big lad. He's still to come back. Do you think that you've got that Holmes and McIntyre are capable of heading balls out of the box and sort of doing the basics, or do you think you're a little bit short in that department because of the injuries?
I certainly think that they're a little bit short, and I think that the way that you see that manifested is when I was at the Luton game, every time there was a ball into the box, they send Andy Carroll back to head things out again, and then he's got to trek all the way back up the pitch. It's a long way for him. He's a long way from the ground.
He's an old man now, isn't he?
He is, yeah, I know. So it's a tricky one. So yeah, definitely, it would be nice to have some of that centre back steel. I think that Sam Hutchinson has been very good at keeping that defense calm. And I think that Tom Holmes, when he has someone like Hutchinson alongside him, is actually quite proficient at defending crosses into the box. I'm not so sure about McIntyre. I tend to see him more as a kind of defender who can step out and break the lines a little bit.
Is he 5'11" as well, McIntyre? So it's or something along those lines. So yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think he scored some goals from corners towards the end of last season and the start of this one, but I think that both of them fell to his feet. So that might sum that up quite nicely. Yeah, but would love to see Naby Sarr back. That's the one for me that
I liked him at Huddersfield. Actually, Naby Sarr. I think he's a good ball playing defender. I think he's probably one that's gotten the odd error in him, even when he plays really well. But I think he's someone who can do the basics in terms of heading balls out of the box. And he gives you a bit of ball playing quality, and reasonably mobile as well. So I think he would tick a lot of boxes. And if he wasn't prone to the occasional error in a game, he'd probably be a Premier League defender. So I think that's one that could really help solidify Reading and maybe help stop you, conceding as many goals. Because I think, like Mark alluded to, it's not a case of you being a bad side defensively. It's just need to tighten up at certain moments.
Yeah. And the other one you mentioned. Oh, sorry, Mark.
So I was just going to say, I think you ask most Reading fans, and I think they tell you that Sarr, Hutchinson, and Holmes would be their top three first choice centre backs. I think you cover a lot of what's needed there. And there was a name there that Liam Moore was a name.
Yeah.
Is that just familiar? Something I feel like there's some degree of familiarity to that name. In theory could come back. That's
one I'm very interested. I'm really interested to see what happens there in January. That's actually one of the things that I think I'm watching with a lot of interest, because whenever you see him in the, he's been showing up on those Tenerife shots a lot, and he's clearly still hanging around the team. And I see Paul Ince in these photos always seems to be the guy who's around him, talking to him. So I wonder if he's, obviously after the statement that was made in January of last year, I think it was, the situation with Liam Moore became tricky, but I do wonder if they might be setting us up here for a return of Liam Moore.
Yeah, no, I think that is going to happen, which is it's going to be really, really interesting to see how. I think there's going to be some fans who are really not going to be keen for that, and there's some fans who are going to be kind of okay with it, and God help him if he makes an error on his first game, is all I'm going to say, because I think that's going to be not particularly a good atmosphere if he does. Let's do a final couple of questions then for the recap before we go and talk about the Coventry game. Let's talk Championship as a whole now. Gab, you're an expert on all these things. You watch more than just Reading, which I think is something you can do with the Championship. I've never really tried it myself. Why is it so tight this year? Why have we got? I mean, as I was saying, Reading are 2 points off the playoffs, and yet we're 13th, and we're only 6 points off the drop zone. Teams West Brom, Hull, Cardiff, not bad teams below us as well. So what's kind of going on that's different to other years?
Wow, what a great question that is. It's a fascinating season, Mark, because there's no mid-table this year, and as you quite rightly say, you're either 5 points above the drop zone or you're 2 points off the playoffs. You're not sort of in a mid-table area where you're kind of you've got either position at arm's length. So I think that means that every team has got to be a little bit on edge, because their season could change in a moment. If you're on the cusp of the playoffs one moment, a few defeats could flip things the other way. And then if you're just above the drop zone, like a West Brom or a Middlesbrough, you have got that potential to put a run together. And I think that means that it means a few teams. I think it means that for yourselves and for Rotherham and for my team, Birmingham, we've all had collected a healthy points tally, and yet we're still very much in the business of ticking off 50 points. And yet, as I mentioned, Middlesbrough and West Brom, who have had really poor starts, and yet under new managers like Michael Carrick and Carlos Corberán, respectively, they've still got an outside chance of pushing on into the playoffs and making something of their season. In terms of why that is, I think there's a few reasons, really. I think, first of all, I think Burnley and Sheffield United are probably the two standout sides in the division. I think maybe Watford and Norwich are the two of the other favourites who have been a little bit more vulnerable. And for that reason, there's more points up for grabs, I suppose, for the mid-table sides. At the same time, as I mentioned earlier, the sides that we all expected to be down there have actually been a lot better, which has meant that it's very difficult to pinpoint the three teams that are going down. Why that is, I think there's so many variables. It's difficult to give you a concrete answer to that, but it's certainly been fun to watch.
Yeah, it certainly has been. It's stressful at times because, as you say, when you lose a game, all of a sudden you think, oh, Christ, we're 13th now and only a few points off the drop zone when you thought you were in like a playoff fight. So it's a bit disorientating as a fan. You don't quite know how to place yourselves. In terms of what do we kind of expect for the second half of the season then? What teams do we maybe expect to be good, what to be bad? I mean, Sheffield United probably the best team I've seen in the first half of the season, but then when Blackburn came to us, they were absolutely crap. So it's difficult to know exactly what sort of teams do we think are going to kind of pull up or pull down in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, another really good question because it's so hard to predict that one. I think that based on the individual quality that Watford and Norwich have, I would probably go with both those sides finishing in the top six, but I don't think either are going to be strong enough to challenge the top two. And I think the good thing for Burnley and Sheffield United is that there isn't an obvious contender because, as you rightly pointed out there, Blackburn are just incredibly inconsistent. They're capable of producing a no-show like they did at your place, and therefore it's very difficult to see them sort of finding the consistency required. And I also think you've got a situation where anyone from Blackburn down to Birmingham or Middlesbrough, I think, will probably take points off one another between now and the end of the season. And with that in mind, it's very difficult to see either of those sides finding the consistency required to challenge for the top two. I would expect Middlesbrough to push on in the second half of the season. I think Coventry have got a chance of finishing in the top six because they've got a couple of games in hand, so a chance for them to discover some momentum. I think West Brom could improve. They win their game in hand. They're only 5 points off the playoffs. They've won 3 on the bounce under Carlos Corberán. But it's very difficult to pick a bottom three as well. So I probably more questions than answers at the moment. I've almost forgotten your question, which I suppose shows you how befuddling the championship is. But we've loved every minute of it, following it from the outside. And let's just hope that both our teams can tick off those 50 points.
You're listening to the Tilehurst End Podcast by Reading fans for Reading fans.
Part of me does wonder if 50 points will actually be enough, but we've certainly been. I'd much rather have the league this way than. I must admit, before the season, I was worried that your Norwiches, your Sheffield Uniteds, and such were just kind of walk away with it. I'm quite unhappy with the financial disparity that you have in the league at the moment for the kind
I agree.
Parachute payment class and the underclass, basically, but. Then again, I suppose while teams like Luton last year, Blackburn this year, QPR are kind of up there again, Millwall as per usual, those teams doing well will probably hurt the argument for changing it because, there is still a way of doing it.
I think the sort of I agree with you about the financial disparity, and I agree that that's a problem in the Championship. But I also think you look at Burnley; they've recruited for a very clear playing identity under Vincent Kompany. You look at Sheffield United; they've played 3-5-2 for the last, or variations of it, for the last 5-6 years. Both those teams have gone right where. Ourselves, Birmingham, yourselves, Reading, you haven't recruited for a clear playing identity. You look at your squad and it's an absolute jumbled mess, to be quite honest with you. And I think that, so yes, we can look at it from a point of view of being wronged a little bit in terms of the distribution of wealth, but when either of us have had the wherewithal to spend, we've not spent wisely. And I think it's spending wisely. It's having a clear plan. It's having a stylistic vision. It's having a very rigorous recruitment process. These things are all crucial to success in the Championship, and I think that will be proven this season.
Yeah, there are also things that Reading simply haven't had.
I think it's really interesting the noting about like the clear plan in the transfer strategy, and we've seen clubs like Brentford come up and with a clear plan. and do well in the Premier League. And before that, I mean, maybe like 10 years ago now, Swansea, I feel like, did a similar thing, or a similar team. Reading certainly can be accused of, before the Mark Bowen return, of really not purchasing in a smart way. I mean, we're still seeing the ramifications of bringing in George Puskás and Lucas João in the same week, despite not really having the ability to do that, of course. But I do think that since Mark Bowen came in, there have been some really smart pickups. And I think that the unifying factor between them all has been they're looking for guys with great self-starting mentalities, I think. Sometimes you hear football analysts talk about like trying to buy captains and trying to buy guys that are great in the locker room. And if I can spot any similarity in the players that have come in, whether that be Tom Ince, whether that be Sam Hutchinson's a good example. I hope Naby Sarr is a good example. But and Andy Carroll, who it seems did great in the locker room last year with Reading. He had the picture with the rowing the boat as his profile picture on Twitter, even when he was playing for West Brom there, or on his cover photo. So he clearly enjoyed his time here, and good for the locker room. So I think that's kind of been what they've been trying to go for this summer. And obviously they've had to pick up the diamonds in the rough in terms of not having the funds to go after any real players. But it has been nice to see some semblance of a plan in place. Next summer is the key one, obviously. Whether
a lot of players out of contracts next summer, aren't there?
Yeah, which is nothing new for Reading fans, unfortunately, in recent years.
But we'll be free of the transfer embargo. We can go and spaff all this money again, and just go and spend £10 million on a player and do the whole thing again, can't we?
Oh no,
exactly.
don't do that.
Is Joey van der Berg available?
We can sign George Puskás all over again. Yeah, I know. I felt the same when Gav was saying about clear transfer strategy and everything. It is really just something that Reading have kind of shown glimpses of at times, but really nothing's.
Oh well, I think before Bowen returned, Mark, it was very much an agent-led strategy, and I always think that if your whole strategy is it's one thing to have relationships with agents, and sometimes you need to do certain deals in order to get the deals you really want, and I understand that can be part of football. But when your entire overarching strategy is led by one or two agents, then I think you have massive problems, because those agents have their own independent agenda. They're not paid by the football club to serve Reading Football Club, and I think that's kind of where you have a lot of problems. And yeah, I think I'm really glad that Mark Bowen has come in, because I think he's brought a lot of operational nous, and hopefully things can sort of steadily. I mean, to be honest, I think you're quite lucky to be able to have another chance to rebuild in the Championship, because I thought you would have had to rebuild and do this process in League One. So I think you've got to be quite grateful for that, if I'm honest.
Oh yeah. Talk about agent-led transfers and stuff. Yeah. We know what happens with that. I think it's been one of the massive problems with Reading in Kia Javachvin's kind of era, if we even call it that. But so in terms of what all this Championship stuff means for the second half of the season and for Reading, what do we think then? I'll get you guys to both hand over a prediction for a finish in a minute.
My God.
Prepare yourself for probably one of the most difficult questions that I can ask you. But in the meantime, we can have a bit of a dig into what's kind of the good chance, if there is a good chance, of Reading springing a late run towards the Championship. What's kind of the good chance of Reading collapsing and being punished for all these things that we have gone wrong at the club over the last years? And so Ross, I'll start with you. What's the direction that you think Reading are most likely to be looking in the second half of the season?
I'm going to say that it's going to be good, because I want to get that out of the way early. But it really depends on how they get on in December. January sees us play West Brom, Queen's Park Rangers, and Sheffield United. So that's going to be a tricky month, and I think and a lot of those games are away. So I think that we're going to want to put some points on the board as soon as possible. So Coventry's not the easiest start, but we've got Gabs Birmingham after that, and Swansea. So I would hope that we can start putting some points together early. I think it's a great point to say that we only need to get to 50 points or around there. That's 7 more wins for Reading right now, which feels doable, when you're just looking at the table, obviously. But when you start to look at the fixtures, it can become a little bit harder to find them, given our current form through October and November. But I think it's going to be positive if Reading can come out of January having at least won one of those games and maybe drawn another one, then the morale in the group should stay good. And yeah, I can see Reading getting there reasonably comfortably this season.
Yeah, up or down?
I think Reading will finish lower than where they are currently. I think for me, the question is how much lower. I don't see Reading having another push back into the top half, if I'm going to be honest. I think a lot is going to depend. So do I see Reading getting somewhere between 48 to 50 points, or possibly passing the 50-point mark? The answer to that would be yes. However, I also have some question marks over what the teams below Reading are going to do, because it's very difficult not to come at this question from the point of view of the other teams, because even if we say Blackpool and Huddersfield go down, which I'm not ready to say either of those things are certain yet, but even let's say they do, there's still one other relegation spot to find. West Brom, I don't think are going to go down under Carlos Corberán. Hull and Wigan, I think, are going to invest. Cardiff could be vulnerable, but they've got quite a big squad. Bristol City have got a lot of talent. Stoke have got Alex Neil. They've got quite a big squad as well. Rotherham have put in some good performances under Matt Taylor. Birmingham, my team, well coached by John Eustace. Middlesbrough, I don't think are going to be anywhere near the dogfight. So I think you're kind of. I think it's possible. I mean, I think it's possible that Cardiff go down, but I'm not quite sure where I am on there's a lot of distracting factors that make so let me try and just unpack this in my head for a moment. There's a lot of teams that could go down, but there's no one that I'm confident or certain will go down. And so that's a slight concern for Reading, because if all those teams take a lot of points off all the teams that are in the playoff conversation, which I think is perfectly possible, then I think what Reading will need could, as I think one of you discussed earlier, might end up needing more than 50 points. And I think that's where you might encounter some problems, especially if we see one or two injuries, especially to the likes of Lucas João, for instance, and the injuries at centre-half continue. So I realise that's not a very direct answer to the question, but I think so much does depend on this myriad of factors of the other teams, really, because I don't see Reading getting much more than 50 points. Feel free, either of you, to disagree with me on that, but that's probably where I'd sit at the moment.
I think it's very diplomatic, isn't it, Ross? I think you're totally allowed to come onto this podcast and predict that we'll do badly, because we do that quite often ourselves anyway.
Right.
So, but I know it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because Reading, it's the Championship and it's also Reading. And in terms of, what other teams can do badly, I mean, you can also potentially look above us. I mean, someone like Luton under a new manager now will be under a lot of pressure. We'll talk a bit. I don't think Luton. I don't think Luton or Coventry are going down myself. But I mean, I would be interested to get either of your views. Like, am I being a little bit harsh here? Do you think you will get more than 50 points? Do you think you'll get to 55 or 60 or something like that?
I think that if they can go on another little run sometime between now and February, it gets to be very difficult to see them going down. And Reading, I swear, I mean, maybe every football fan feels like this, but I swear since the dawning of time, Reading have been one of the streakiest teams I can remember, whereby they don't win off and on. They win in chunks and then they lose in chunks as well. So I think we lost something like 8 in a row last year at one point. Things got really sour, but I can remember several winning runs through the last few years that have been like 4 or 5 games strong as well.
I also, just on that, I also feel like there's this habit of you start a season badly and then a new manager comes in and you stay up, and then you start the next season badly and then a new manager comes in and you stay up, and a bit like Blues, actually we've had a few seasons like that, and actually I thought that trend would continue. I thought you'd have a really bad first half of this season and get rid of Paul Ince, possibly. That, honestly, I hope Paul does well, but that was kind of how I was thinking of it, if I'm being honest. And I thought it would be about, well, if you got another appointment in, would that person keep you up with, Lucas Shaw and, some of the individual quality and some of the individual quality in there. So yeah, but actually, in fairness to Paul Ince, he's done an absolutely really impressive job so far this season, and maybe I've been proved a little bit wrong about that.
I've been surprised by, so I thought that I wasn't a huge fan of Paul Ince through the last half of last season. I thought that he was kind of riding on one of these streaky waves of momentum that Reading can go on from time to time, and just having somebody who wasn't Veljko Paunovic in front of the players, honestly, was helping at that point. I did not expect Paul Ince to come into the season playing a 3-5-2. I thought I wasn't aware that Paul Ince was as tactically astute enough to understand that there were formations outside of the 4-4-2 or the 4-5-1. So it's been a pleasant surprise so far this season.
And also, sorry, just to jump in on that as well, Hoylett at wing back, I'd be really interested, because that was one of the things he's done to accommodate the 3-5-2. How would you say that's worked, Ross?
Hoylett's been great. Hoylett's been one of our best performers, and I think that if Tom Ince wasn't having the late career revival that he appears to be having, then a lot more people will be talking about Junior Hoylett. The Tilehurst End's Ben Thomas can't stop talking about Junior Hoylett, and I really love him as well. I think he's a great player. I think that he has just that little extra bit of quality that Reading sometimes need. He's one of the few players that doesn't immediately run out of ideas in the final third.
I know what you mean. He's got that. It's like he can it's almost like he can sort of freeze the picture, Ross, in that final third, isn't it? It's like he's got that ability, and I don't know how to phrase this professionally, but it's like a slight flick of his boot. It's like if he puts a cross in, he can get like a certain angle on it. I mean, I'm only explaining this with certain body motions that might not translate particularly well in podcast form, but he's got a real
great though.
Yeah, exactly. He's got a real sort of flamboyance about him in that final third, which can make a real difference to the quality of shots or deliveries.
Definitely. It's the one thing that could make me worry about Reading in the second half of the season is how these players come back from the World Cup. And I don't think they're going to massively fall off, but I think it's completely natural that before the World Cup, they were playing out of their skins deliberately to try and make those cup teams. So, now that they're back, Junior Hoylett, obviously with the 3 losses for Canada, I imagine that was quite a deflating experience for him, despite getting to go to the World Cup. So I do hope that that hasn't affected them in any kind of negative way. But we'll see.
Sorry, was there someone else at the World Cup that plays for Reading as well? So
there was Baba Rahman.
Baba Rahman, right.
He gave Ghana the Reading experience of Baba Rahman, which was defensive frailty, attacking. Let's call it mercurial brilliance.
It's weird with Baba Rahman, isn't it? Because I think he was signed in 2015 for Chelsea, and it was one of those where Mourinho didn't really want him, but Chelsea did want him because they thought he was supposed to be quite good. And I always feel like that's quite a tough experience for a player if you're kind of forced into a club, almost, and the manager doesn't want you, and it's like, I think mentally that's kind of quite a tough process to sort of go through, I suppose. But I imagine he's kind of better as a wing back than maybe as a fullback. I don't know what you think, Mark.
Yeah, and I think he was. I think at Chelsea he was signed. Was it the same window that Michael Hector signed? Is why I heard of him, because Michael Hector went at the same time. I know he had a lot of injury problems. He's speaking before the World Cup about how he's kind of coming back from that. But I think he's another one who has suited the 3-5-2. And Reading, I mean, we have Nesta Guinness-Walker, but isn't necessarily of championship quality for a 46-game season. So Reading fans having him.
Yeah, I was surprised when you went for Guinness-Walker. With all respect, I mean,
we were as well. I think surprise is probably a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Rahman's going to be a pretty consistent cog in this team moving forward with Hoylett and Guinness-Walker as kind of the alternatives. Even Yeardon can move over, which is good. So I'm going to have to press you guys into a prediction. Then we've had enough time to think about it. I will go first so that you're not making it absolute fools of yourself. And I will say that I think Reading are going to finish 16th this year. Which I always feel like there are three positions that every championship club or every championship fan thinks they're going to finish. It's either 6th, that they'll sneak into the playoffs, 8th, that they'll have a good season but just miss out, or 16th, that they'll just kind of fizzle and fade. And unfortunately, I've gone for the cliche of us fizzling and fading in the last few weeks, because I think while we saw last season, Reading did have a really good kind of spate of form and then had a few games of it kind of drifting away. I think if Reading, Ross was talking about those runs earlier, having a, between now and February, whether it happens in March or whatever, I think we'll go on one of those as well. And I think that'll take us clear. And then probably when it's clear, I can't see us having the momentum. Maybe by then it'll be too late anyway, but to push into the playoffs, I don't see us having. So Ross, what are you going to say for a prediction?
I'm going to say we finish exactly where we are right now in 13th place. I think that it's going to stay relatively tight in the championship for a long time. So I could see us finishing 13th and 18th place being 2 points behind us or something like that. But I'm going to say that a run some point in the winter is going to see us home and dry. And again, for me, if the season's over for us by March, that's job's a good one. Everything's fine.
Gab, what you reckon?
This is such a difficult one for me, Mark, because and I know we're a little bit pushed for time, so I'll try and wrap this up a little bit. But I think it's very difficult to predict something for Reading when I've got no idea where I am with the Championship's bottom half. I'm certainly not certain that Blackpool and Huddersfield will go down, and certainly Wigan could improve under Kolo Touré. The issue that I have is that I expect Wigan and Hull to invest in January. Cardiff have a good defensive record and they've been creating chances. Bristol City have players like Alex Scott and Tommy Conway. Stoke, I think, are going to improve under Alex Neil. West Brom under Carlos Corberán. Middlesbrough under Carrick. Blues, I can't see us dropping off under Eustace. And Rotherham, I think, have been playing quite well under Matt Taylor. And I know that that's a lot of teams to mention when it comes to Reading's prediction, but it's very difficult to discount all these things. I don't know if Reading are going to improve their squad in January because I think that the resources are going to be quite tight. So for an honest prediction, I do think that Reading will get dragged in still to a relegation battle. I know you'll probably disagree with that, and same with you, Ross, but that's kind of how I see it going, because I think that there's not a huge gap between the bottom half teams and the top half teams. So I think that I think there'll be a bit of an evening out where some of the teams towards the bottom will pick up a lot more points, and that's where Reading could get dragged into some jeopardy. However, I'm not brave enough to go on to the Tilehurst End podcast and say Reading are still going to go down when you're currently mid-table. So I'm going to say you're going to finish 20th and finish a few places above the drop zone.
The money arrived in your account then, did it, Gab? That's good.
I mean, to be fair, we gave up on predicting relegation.
It's my life for us. I don't want to invest in security when everyone else goes to the Madstad.
Yeah, that's fair. Security at the Select Car Leasing Stadium is definitely needed.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I think we gave up on predicting relegation a good 8 weeks ago, so it's totally out of fashion now. Yeah, no, I think I totally understand your point. I think it is just going to be, I think what I would say about those teams you've mentioned is I think a couple of them, I think there's a good chance that they'll crash and burn. People will quite rightly say there's a chance that Reading will crash and burn as well. But I kind of look at a Cardiff or a Hull. I I mean, we don't know about Wigan. Obviously, Kolo Toure's in his first management now. He could be great.
But Mark, just on this though, Wigan didn't spend an awful lot in the summer. I think they're going to have a lot of capital to invest to back Kolo Toure, because this is someone who's worked at Celtic and Leicester. Like, I don't think he's taking the Wigan job without some reassurances. And then you look at Hull, where they've got the Turkish Simon Cowell as owner. They brought in Jean-Michel Siri from Fulham, the title winner last season. They're going to have a bit of capital to spend for Liam Rosenior. I don't think Reading can do anything near that in the market. I think their scope is going to be incredibly limited.
Oh, 100%.
And therefore, if there's going to be a few injuries, I think that could really take its toll. I remember first half of last season when you ended up with a ridiculous number of injuries, and I would just worry if you had anything similar to that this time around. I would worry a little bit about things dropping off, but I still think you'll be able to just about keep your heads above water, but I don't think it's going to be an easy ride.
Yeah, what do you think? The team that I'm kind of looking at in the lower half that I'm a little bit suspect of right now, oddly, is Stoke. And I know they brought Alex Neil in, but they also brought a lot of players in the summer, and they've been buying players for a little while. So I wonder if they might have to be relatively careful with Alex Neil in terms of bringing players in, and that might harm how quickly he's able to put his idea of the team together.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I don't know if I necessarily see Stoke going on a spending spree in January, but I just rate Alex Neil very highly because he's worked miracles at Hamilton Academicals. He's won promotion from this level before with Norwich. He's built playoffs chasing sides with Preston North End on a bottom six budget. And he won promotion from League One with Sunderland last season. So this is a 7 out of 10 Championship manager, a bit like Gary Rowett at Millwall. And I think with that in mind, I struggle to see an Alex Neil side being relegated. That's just my opinion. Whereas I would probably have less confidence in Paul Ince because he doesn't have that same track record behind him.
Be loud and be proud and back the boys and make some noise. Come on, you Rs!
Shout out to this week's podcast sponsor, ZCZ Films, showing that age is no barrier to being a hula hoop.
Well, let's talk Coventry then, as that's what Reading have up next, Saturday, December the 10th, 2 p.m. at Select Car Leasing Stadium. This is a team that have won 4 in a row before the break without conceding. So I guess you could say the World Cup came at the wrong time for them. I mean, there's still a lot of off-pitch trauma for Coventry. And the question for us, Gab, is that going to unite them and galvanise them and kind of push them onwards? Or, as I guess has happened at that club previously in the last few years, will it kind of crumble them? Will it push them back towards the relegation zone, and we'll find a team that maybe is kind of scarred from continual? Because, I mean, for anyone who doesn't know, they've been served with an eviction notice from their stadium. So there's uncertainty over that. That's probably going to affect their January spending potentially. So what way is that one going to
go? Well, I think Coventry have got a handful of top Championship players in Callum O'Hare when fit, Gus Hamer, of course, and absolutely the obvious one would be Victor Gyökeres, who I'm an enormous fan of, and he's Reading defence is ragged at the moment. And I think while the issues with the stadium is probably going to affect the fans because there's a little bit of uncertainty, I don't necessarily know if it changes too much for the playoffs. I think it's business as usual from that perspective. And I feel like you can overestimate how big an impact that's going to have. So I would still expect a competitive performance from Coventry City, and they've got match winners who can make a real difference on their day.
Ross, how do you see this one going?
I think a lot's going to depend on Sam Hutchinson's return to the team. We talked a little bit earlier about how he kind of calms the younger minds in the defense, and also having him. I do think that they might go to the Sam Hutchinson, Tom Holmes, and then playing Yiadom in the back three model that they've done quite a few times. But having him back does mean that if they want to play Toms, McIntyre, and Holmes, they can play Hutchinson in that back three and get Yiadom forward. Might not be a bad thing considering Hoylett's just come back from the World Cup. So I think
also just on that, McIntyre is left-footed as well. So if you're playing with a back three, it helps to have the left centre back being left-footed as well.
Exactly, yeah. Which, by the way, is another reason why Liam Moore might end up back. I think he's left footed. I might be wrong about that, but he certainly plays on the left side of the defense a lot. Yeah, I can see us. I think a tidy 1-1 would be perfectly fine here. Let's get off the blocks again with a point. Let's just keep that momentum going, or get some momentum going even. And yeah, I think a 1-1 here, considering that they've won 4 in a row. I think that would be a perfectly fine result for Reading.
Yeah, I think so as well. We'll do a prediction in just a second, but I did have one question to both of you that we put up on the Tilehurst End Twitter earlier, which is, if you could have only one of the following as certain to happen on Saturday, which would you prefer? Now, Gab, feel free to interchange your team in this, but Reading win 3-0 or England win 3-0. It has actually sparked a lot of debate. And actually, what's interesting about the replies to this tweet is that pretty much everyone who said it is absolutely certain that it is England or Reading. And there's kind of, there's people saying, oh, you need to give your head a wobble if it's X or Y. But actually, it's interesting how it's gone, and also interesting to see the result. I'm going England 3-0 in this because it's the World Cup quarter-final, Nations League, not even a chance or anything like that. And I think that's probably a pretty common consensus. So, Ross, what are you thinking on England or Reading?
Well, as I sit here in my World Cup cave, I have to say England. I think that leaving England turned me into more of an England fan than ever before. Previously, I'd definitely been a club over country guy, but since coming out here, I think there's something about just, watching England and enjoying being part of the football community over here, but then being like, and look at our team, it's better than yours. So it's England for me. I seeing England beat France in a World Cup quarterfinal would be a pretty special thing.
What would you say, Gab?
Yeah, I think as much as I struggle with this World Cup based on the obvious reasons, I still think that, England getting to the semi-finals and giving themselves an opportunity to win the World Cup. If England win the World Cup, that goes down in history. That would be the first in my lifetime, and I think it'd be very difficult to go away from that for the sake of Blues getting another 3 points towards the 50 mark, which I sort of feel like we'll get to anyway. So, I would probably go with the England to beat France 3-0.
Now, that's how you make friends on this podcast. Come on and say you don't want Birmingham to win. That's how you do. Yeah. That's how you do things there. Cracking. Well, let's round off with a quick prediction for the game then. And we've got the prediction league, which I will update you on. We had a flurry of scoring before the break. 3 guys, Sim, Westy and Ben, all got the whole score perfect. Handbags and Adam got Watford perfect. So in ascending order, we've got Ollie on 5, myself on 8, Westy and Adam on 9 points. Sim, who's got 8 points in 7 games on a bit of a run, he's on 13. Then Handbags and Ben on top for 14. Ross, are you going to stick with your 1-1?
Yeah, I'm going to go with it's a 1-0, and it's a real Andy Carroll goal this time, not one off somebody's knee.
Beautiful. What are you going to say for this one then, Gav?
2-1 Coventry, mate.
I think I'm going to 1-1 myself as well, which usually, to be fair, usually if our fans are predicting 1-1, then that's not always a great sign that we think we're going to do well. But I think because it's the first game back, I think it's going to be pretty quiet and chill and, maybe a bit edgy and everyone a little bit like a pre-season game, maybe. But let's wait and see. So we'll be back after the Coventry game. We'll be back into business as usual. We've got Coventry, then Birmingham the next Friday night. So we won't have Gab on that one because he'll be far too biased to come and give his opinions on Birmingham and Reading. So thanks very much, Gab, for popping on and talking all things EFL with us.
No problem, Mark. Look forward to coming on again, hopefully later in the season.
And Ross, always a pleasure, mate.
Thanks, Mark. Come on, you Royals. Come on, England.
Absolutely. We've got a Saturday footballing feast. It's just as well they changed the kickoff of the Reading game. They were in talks to change the kickoff of the England game to move it slightly further away from Reading. But I think it's fair enough that we took the hit on that one and moved ourselves a little further away. We'll be back hopefully after a fantastic weekend of football. Thank you very much for listening, joining us once again as we get back into action for the Championship. And come on, you Arts.
You smile, funny how